Wes, can you hear us?
The remote, I can hear you. This is Steve Altman.
Perfect. I can hear the remote. I don't hear anybody else speaking. I'm not sure if Wes is speaking.
I can hear you now.
Oh, perfect. Wes, not sure if you're speaking. We can't hear you at all if you are.
You guys hear me through here?
Perfect. Now we can.
Well, all right. It looks like I get to talk through Megan's. Let me do something here. All right. So we will have Brian, if you'd like to share.
Wes, you might put your computer on mute then because it's picking up some tones out here. We like double echoing.
Yeah. Hold on one second. Let's see. Oh, okay. I'm gonna have to. I apologize.
I feel like I'm at the state fair during the grandstand show. So it's good.
The phone on as well? Like you got your phone on or no? Oh, okay.
All right. We'll go through Megan's computer since apparently my microphone is not working. So, Megan, you want to pull up the list and have yours unmuted, and you want to turn up your speakers there just so that there shouldn't be an echo when you speak through yours. So we'll try this again. I apologize. Anya, are you there? Can you hear us? Would you like to unmute and just state your name and your affiliation?
Hi everyone, this is Anya Bayers, IDNR Coastal Management Program.
Okay, thank you, Anya. Brian Cox?
Brian Cox, IDPH, Plumbing and Water Quality Program, Division of Environmental Health.
Thank you. Can you everybody hear that okay? Kind of, sort of. Yeah, I apologize. We'll maybe have to look at getting a speaker or some kind of system to bring along with us next time. Gary. Gary Bingheimer.
Okay. Programs for the Illinois EPA Bureau of Water.
Okay, thank you. And Garen.
Jaren Chick Butler, Department of Public Health, and I'm on the same team with Brian.
Glenn.
This is Glenn Heaston. I'm with the Illinois State Water Survey.
Okay. Michael.
Michael Woods with Illinois Department of Agriculture, Division of Natural Resources.
I apologize if I miscorrect this. Is it Nadan?
Yes, it is. First of all, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. My name is Nadan Singh. I'm the Deputy Section Manager for the Illinois State Revolving Loan Program.
Okay. Robert.
This is Robert Hirschfeld from Prairie Rivers Network.
Russell.
This is Russ Blincham with the IDNR, Office of Water Resources, in the Lake Michigan program.
Scott?
This is Scott Twait from Illinois EPA, Water Quality Standards.
And Steve?
Steve Altman, Office of Water, Illinois DNR, Office of Water Resources, Division of Resource Management.
Tara?
Hi, Tara Jagadish with the IGNR Coastal Management Program. I'm also with Anya.
I saw somebody join by phone, a 217 number, last two digits, 93. May not be able to unmute being on the phone.
That's Gary Bengenheimer. I called in.
Okay, thanks, Gary. I thought it might have been. I just wanted to double check and make sure. Okay, that's everybody I have on the presentation. So let me go ahead and bring this back up. And you guys should all be seeing my screen just fine. Megan, unfortunately, we may have to have you carry your laptop around for people to speak into, particularly as Lauren kicks us off with our welcome. Yeah. You want to unplug?
This would be interesting to take notes when you took my laptop.
Yeah, I know.
Oh.
Thank you.
Thank you. So again, good afternoon, everybody. Lauren Wobig, IDNR, Water Resources. Honored to serve as the chair of the State Water Plan Task Force. Not a real long agenda before us, but a full agenda, I think. There's kind of a lot to cover here as we continue to share on how we're making progress on our recommendations and where we're at in terms of transitioning into implementing what's in the plan now that we put so much effort into developing the plan. And one of those things is water reuse, which is the second recommendation in the water use laws and regulations portion of the state water plan. And so we're going to hear more about that in a minute as we, as a group, really try to kind of embrace that topic and what kind of challenges or direction we think we want to move towards implementing that recommendation. We have some business to take care of after we get the welcome, approval of the minutes, and then we'll give it a chance to share on after we hear from our guests and more about water reuse and have that discussion. We're going to want to share where we're at on some of the advancements of the other recommendations with that, legislative updates, and then talk about where we go for our next meeting. So that's kind of what's before us today. Wes, it might make sense for us to approve the minutes first before we get into our guest speaker. I think everybody has seen those probably in an email from Megan at some point. Is that correct?
Those have been sent out to the group, so that you just need to approve those minutes.
So I'll look for a motion to approve. Motion and a second by EPA.
Michael Woods, so moved.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion? Any corrections or any issues? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Thank you. The minutes are approved. Do we need it? We don't usually approve the agenda, do we? I didn't think we did. That's right. Gotta get which, depending on what organization I'm sitting in, which ones we do there. Thank you, everybody. So with that, I think I would like to start off as we move to the water reuse presentation. We do have guests as they introduce themselves on the go around from the University of Illinois, Chicago, or affiliated thereof with that group. But as we have gotten into again, the state water plan has a recommendation. The recommendation actually is, proposed state legislation defining regulation of water use. But I think before we can really get into that, and I'm very appreciative of Todd and a lot of your team that are here because EPA is into this, up to their eyeballs and when we get into all of this. So appreciate your engagement here early on, but I think we just want to, at this point, learn a little bit more about what we're talking about, have an open discussion about where we could or think we want to go with that and opportunities that might present themselves as we just work to advance this specific recommendation. So that's just kind of a focal point. It's an interest point as well. A lot of folks talking about water reuse, especially in northeastern Illinois, and as we've gotten into allocating new communities using Lake Michigan water because of groundwater depletion issues, that this has all kind of come to the forefront on people's minds and thoughts about, does this make sense? Should we go forward? I can tell you, especially I've been traveling a lot here in the last couple of months. There are certainly in the Great Lakes region, there are several other states and communities that are doing this already. So we do have examples out there that we could look at if necessary and where it works or what challenges they faced or what, problems they might have faced in trying to deal with that. So with that, I think I'll introduce Rachel and let you take it from there. Thank you. Yep, we will pass the baton over. Thank you.
Everyone, I'm Rachel Haverlock, coming from the UIC Freshwater Lab, and I'm here with my colleagues because I really come at this from the policy angle. So it's really to open up a conversation today. My colleague Krishna Reddy is here on the engineering and technical side, and then my colleagues Matt and AR on the financial and cost benefit analysis. And if I may begin with a little biography, this research was really inspired by the Illinois State Water Survey. Dr. Kelly, I think it was 2018 when you came to UIC. We secured a room with then Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, Deborah Shore, now Administrator Shore of Region 5. And you gave the presentation about the groundwater projections in northeastern Illinois and kept turning to everyone around me. I'm like, did he just say 15 years? And my own background in this area is from decades of work in the Middle East on alternative supply, including reuse. So it's very exciting. It's very full circle to be able to bring up these topics because it really began with that presentation. So kind of just give a little bit of background. We can go to the next slide. So we'll just kind of tell you where our research has taken us to date and some next steps. Obviously, to kind of emphasize the imperative of water recycling in Illinois, not a place that traditionally people have thought about it because usually driven by kind of extreme and visible drought and some of our unevenness of water resources are not visible to the eye. So we'll kind of focus in on some of the imperatives. We'll talk about the research we've published to date recommending a dual pipeline system. And then we'll open it up for your thoughts and input and some of the next steps and possibilities for partnerships. And we can go to the next slide. And so we came to this research through collaboration with the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago, and then these agencies that we represent. And so, and really we congealed when the US EPA had a big water reuse grant and we wanted to go for it. But then we realized that we did not yet have the kind of groundwork to be competitive. So we teamed up with MWRD to kind of define some of the parameters in order to be competitive for some of those national grants, which is where we'll end our discussion today. Thanks for advancing the slide. And so just to kind of start out, our recommendation in the state of Illinois is for recycling for industrial uses. So we are not talking about potable reuse in this case. Right, we're very interested in industrial and commercial use. So I think that might have some implications for the kind of legislation that we're looking at. And our research to date really looked at MWRD's plants and their ability to provide some of their water for industrial and commercial uses, whether within Cook County or outside. And, really the kind of urgency of this moment is because we're seeing massive investments through the US EPA and through the Infrastructure Act in these technologies. And I can just share, on the US EPA Water Resources Action Plan, our project is the singular one in Illinois. So we're kind of not registering on this federal level. And I think there's great opportunities for us to do so, that we really can lead in this sector and in the Great Lakes region as well, if you don't mind advancing it. And okay, so, why reuse water? Well, the groundwater depletion means that we've got to find modes of expanding the supply. We also have a unique situation because of the Chicago area waterway system. We have the deep tunnel system. We've got massive investments in holding the contents of combined sewers, storing them, treating them, and then we release it. So this is a kind of a unique situation because we are a Great Lakes state without return use, and there's high volumes of that water, and it can be reused without impacting navigation. Also really thinking about this emerging uneven water geography. I was at Chicago City Hall with my colleagues on Friday discussing the July floods. And so here's this massive question of like what to do with the storm water after a rain event. And meanwhile, we go inland a little bit and it's what to do with groundwater depletion. So trying to balance some of these extremes with infrastructure and advanced planning. And the other kind of really exciting part about it is, again, as I said, right now, especially in the greater Chicago area, we're looking at like pure cost. Right, again, retaining, storing, treating, discharging this water, it's all costs. And we're losing out, I think, on the potential rate-bearing power of water when reused. And okay, well, also bringing in this additional supply can help to protect Lake Michigan and rivers from being overtaxed, and can also further attract industries to the state. By expanding that overall supply, we have more potential for economic growth. Thank you for advancing. Again, why now? The federal funding, groundwater emergency. We can talk about this in the Q&A. MWRD does have some provision on a case-by-case basis with approval from the Illinois Department of Public Health to supply its water. It meets current standards. So there is a way to kind of pilot a project and even get going while the state works out some of the task force works out some of those issues around regulation. We have found a very successful precedent in Los Angeles. Since 1995, the West Basin water utility has supplied recycled water to industry with great effect, expanding the amount of water available for households, bringing industry in as a partner to help develop that infrastructure, and also protecting Santa Monica Bay. And another reason why now is that the conveyance structure from Chicago to Joliet is being built right now. It's a historic, out of basin change of supply. And so we do think that it's a very solid deal. It averts an emergency, but we think that there's actually room to strengthen this plan and make provision for future growth. And again, I don't need to, tell the people in this room the kind of unique, I really don't even want to be the one speaking about it before the Illinois State Water Survey, but the unique geology here makes recharge on a human timescale impossible. So this has to be addressed. We can keep going. And here, with the supply to Joliet and the surrounding communities, is, we can see again in this really helpful graphic, Joliet is at the center, but we're looking at communities across 4 or 5 counties that are also going to need an alternative water supply. And so, and I think it's the next slide, if you don't mind. Right, so, here's the issue that we're looking to avoid. There is some possibility that with the water supply from Chicago, that we can get right up to Illinois' allotted allocation, determined by the US Supreme Court. If Joliet meets that upper level of what they've been allocated, we can be at that point of hitting the limit of the US Supreme Court diversion limit. Okay, so then Joliet is receiving water. Obviously, no one anywhere, especially in the state of Illinois, should go without drinking water. But if we meet all of Joliet's needs, domestic, commercial, industrial, with Lake Michigan water, what happens when the other communities in those counties come looking for drinking water? So this is the scenario that we are hoping to avoid, that we expand the supply now for Joliet and other communities, and we don't get to a situation where we've got populous areas and no source of water. So keep going. Yep. So again, this is exactly as I said before, what we want to avoid is having any communities that are without drinking water. So by expanding our supply with recycled water, we've got an overall availability of water. And I want to emphasize again, we want to protect source water for domestic uses by including recycled water for industry and commercial uses in the equation. Okay, so our research to date is really looking at a dual pipeline system. We've, again, thought about this within Cook County, but the specific proposal that we've worked out is in a case like a community of Joliet, which has a pretty substantial industrial footprint, we introduce a second pipeline. One of those pipelines brings treated Lake Michigan water, and the second one would come from one of the two MWRD plants. We've scoped it for the Calumet plant, which has a slightly higher water quality, and a Stickney plant, and we kind of imagine, maybe stacked pipelines along that same easement. And this is really inspired by the economic gain of building two pipelines at once, not building one pipeline and then going back in some 15, 20 years and trying to redo the project. And although we did look at Joliet as our model, we recommend a dual pipeline system for all communities that need to switch off the groundwater. So yes to their domestic needs and yes to their industrial needs, but that's where the recycled water comes in. Going. And I mean, it's a win-win scenario. We think industry, as it was in Los Angeles, would be very open to it. Securing a reliable, probably affordable water supply in a time of volatility. It can support economic growth, and it puts front and center what is a necessary humanitarian project of making sure every household has a source of water. Keep going. And the benefits: staying within Illinois' diversion limit, expanding supply, bringing wastewater into productive use, transforming the cost of storing and treating into revenue, accommodating population and economic growth, and as Krishna can specify, reducing the overall carbon footprint. And here, as I said before, this has been going on in the West Basin District in Los Angeles since 1995. They raised $600 million from different grants to install the project. This is, the biggest industrial reuse project in the world, and about 52% of their water is going to refineries. The refineries, in many cases, installed point of use treatment, these satellites, and industry in that case, through the rates that they pay, are partners in the infrastructure development. So this is what's gone on in Los Angeles, and kind of really important. They've produced since 95, 225 billion gallons of recycled water. That has all been rate bearing, and they've secured more available water for Los Angeles households. So this is our model. We think we can do this maybe even better here in Illinois, and we can go to the next slide. So some next steps that we'd like to bring up today. The Department of the Interior has made an appropriation for large-scale water recycling projects. We're kind of here today because this is available for utilities, tribes, and states. And we'd really like to partner today with a proposal and use this as an opportunity to get Illinois into the reuse space. We're hoping today to identify a pilot project. The Water Research Foundation has also opened up a grant to kind of produce a model of how different agencies can collaborate around reuse. Here again, we're here at the task force because we think it would be kind of exciting to do this in Illinois and produce a model that could be used in other parts of the country. We, hope that we can hear from your different agency perspectives about some of your thoughts, maybe form a working group around reuse. And as I guess you'll speak about next, thinking about legislation and regulation for reuse, especially industrial reuse in particular. So here's some of the next steps. And here are just some of the ideas that we're also here to discuss today, partnering on these grants, establishing a proof of concept through a pilot project, answering questions about point of use treatment, public health implications, coordinating on some legislation, conducting workshops across the University of Illinois, extending the research into centralized and fit for purpose treatment, and something that we have identified in the next stage of our research is to also really think about affordability implications. Because again, the Joliet deal is vital. It's a very good deal. It creates healthy interdependencies among the state, but it also is raising a lot of concerns in the city about the cost burden, which will largely fall on households. So something that we really want reuse to do is not only address questions of water need and bringing industry in that way, but how do we have industry secure this source of water in ways that helps to share the cost burden so that no one in Illinois finds themselves in a position where they can't afford their water bill. So we really want reuse to be part of this affordability conversation, and just working with different stakeholders and policymakers in order to implement these programs. And we can go to the next slide, and we can make this available to us, but this is our contact as well as our colleague who's sorry she can't be here today, Dr. Teresa Cordova, who runs the Great Cities Institute and is a great former water commissioner herself and leading policymaker. So these are our contact is right here. And we can maybe just bring up the next slide, which just, kind of speaks about some of the research we have going forward. But let me stop and open things up for my colleagues and also for your questions and responses.
Thank you, Rachel. I'll start from the Lake Michigan water allocation perspective. DNR is the entity responsible for allocating Lake Michigan water in northeastern Illinois. We're the ones who did, allocate water to Joliet, and now Steve, nine other communities in the region there. But generally, I'm also maybe similarly, I'm one of the guys who has to sit in a room like this and address each of the other 7 Great Lakes states and the 2 Canadian provinces, tell them that Illinois is staying not only compliant with our court-ordered decree and so forth, but that we are trying our best to be the best stewards of what we're granted, so that there is no doubt in anyone's mind that we should be able to allowed to continue to use that water. And so this is just an area where, exploring water reuse, trying to see how that benefits. The more we reuse it, the less we're pulling out to just that raw water as part of the diversion. And so that just demonstrates Illinois trying to be a good steward of what we're given. And so that's kind of my selfish interest, I know, from the programs we operate. And I would also say that as we talk about getting towards our limit of that diversion, a lot of that is impacted by climate change primarily. And a third, and sometimes more than a third of that diversion is the runoff, that falls on the North Branch, Chicago River watershed, I think part of the Des Plaines watershed, that we have to account, because in re-diversion of all of that system, that water would have been historically tributary to the Great Lakes. So the decree says you've got to, since you're taking it away from the Great Lakes, that's part of your diversion. So when we get to years like 2019, where we had a lot of rainfall, particularly in northeastern Illinois, that component of our diversion skyrockets, right? And so it doesn't matter how great we are at water conservation, how great we are at, trying to manage that. At the end of the day, that runoff, matters. So, and that's a whole nother topic area, how do we try to maybe better reuse or control some of that, so where it's not passing the gauge in Lamont. But from this particular, aspect, this is another opportunity, another tool worth exploring that has an impact on that ultimate version number. So I'll stop there with my comments and see what others have to add in. I certainly want to hear from IEPA, because this certainly ends up, especially as we talk about the need to restructure regulations and so forth, that's a big impact on, EPA water. And so certainly interested in your perspectives as well. Other thoughts before we ask EPA to voice in?
I'll jump in. This is Steve Altman, also from DNR OWR. My division is over the division or diversion of Lake Michigan water, and I've been heavily involved with a lot of these recent allocations. And one of the things I keep on thinking about is, yes, use and reuse will reduce the stress on the diversion, but going to, especially what we've gone through recently and getting communities Lake Michigan allocations, is that, they made the economics work with having, especially with Joliet, having that pipeline and then investing in the infrastructure to have that, based on some of the, a lot of their heavy users are these industry that we want to reach out with this reuse water. I wonder about how it can maybe kind of throw things into chaos a little bit. Now, I obviously support this because for the diversion, this could make a big difference, but this could create some issues based on some of the projections that, especially Joliet, what they're, how much money they're spending on their water distribution system, and they have a lot of industrial clients that that they would be selling to, that this reuse would probably be a better alternative. And I worry about maybe some of the blowback we might be getting from some of these other communities that are in a similar situation.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I've sensed a little bit of that as well. Kind of feel like I'm going into Vegas with my own, blackjack table or something, and having kind of, the casino bosses saying, "Hey, you're cutting into our action," right? So there's certainly that kind of a revenue perspective as well. But communities are making money beyond what it takes just to do the O&M of their water system by the sale of Lake Michigan water. And that certainly impacts this kind of an effort would certainly have an impact on that existing system, physical system that dynamic that's in place.
I don't think it has to. So, one thing that we looked into is actually what should be avoided. And we looked at some cases of resistance by industries when MWRD reached out directly. And MWRD said, "Oh, you're so close. Why don't we become your supplier?" there was resistance from the point of view of the municipality, exactly what you said, Lauren. However, it can be avoided by MWRD or, you know, whatever entity, when we're outside of Cook County, whatever entity is supplying the water, actually wholesaling to the supplier. So in the case of Joliet, what we recommend is actually that MWRD wholesales to the city of Chicago. The city of Chicago supplies Joliet so that there's not, you don't set up competition because you don't want reuse to, everyone wants the utilities to be whole. You know, you don't want to undercut that revenue in any case. And in the case when it comes to, you know, to reused water is right now, the amount of money being gained by it is zero. It's a negative of how, in terms of how much money and how much energy goes into producing it. So there's a wholesale chance where these agencies getting a small amount of money is still a revenue gain. And then, right, that's where policy comes in, right? Is reused water the same price as Lake Michigan water? I mean, there's an argument for it. Or do we incentivize adoption as they do in other parts of the world? Do we incentivize adoption with a lower rate? What they did in Los Angeles was actually help pay for the infrastructure by setting a slightly higher rate for industry. But from industry's point of view, it was a great investment because, you know, the refineries in southern Los Angeles have a locked in water source and a mega drought. I mean, they didn't lose there, right? Because, you know, there's a whole sense of, okay, when you get to, you know, really extreme scarcity situations, you know, who comes off and what, you know, it's coming off the system and what does it mean? There's so much instability there. And again, you know, ISWS can tell us better, but, you know, all this kind of gaming, who can stay on the aquifer for how long? Actually, you know, signing on to recycled water creates a kind of a stability in volatile supply conditions. In Los Angeles, I mean, yeah, like I said, I mean, the heavy industrial users literally are like co-investors in this, you know, and they also benefited from all the grants that came in to build the infrastructure. So I think, you know, the idea is set up no competition when it comes to the utilities. You know, but the pricing question, I mean, it's a question, and that's going to take a lot of discussion of like what that, you know, what those price points are. But yeah, I mean, and the whole question again of, you know, the expectation of different industries or warehouses in the Joliet area, you know, it comes down to it, they don't need drinking water. I mean, they, you know, they don't require it, whereas human beings do. So to me, yeah, I mean, I think, you know, they, you know, there remain questions that we want to answer about the different water quality needs of different industries. But in the end, they need a water supply. They don't need a Lake Michigan water supply.
Hey, Rachel, this is Steve Altman again. I have one thing that I did notice when we were doing the allocation is that with some of these communities that they're at, you know, they're selling it, you know, farther upstream. And what we're starting to see too is that they've monetized a lot of this for their community. And what we're running into is that we have communities that have, you know, significant water loss that are really spending no water on their distribution, no money on their distribution system because because if they put that money into the system, then they're not going to be getting this money they're getting from their water plant. And I think, you know, selling on to others, we've seen this in a couple communities, and that is another concern that we have is that it's, you know, and it's an unintended consequence, but, you know, a lot of these communities that, you know, could be reducing their water supply, they're not doing it because it's funding things like parks and streets and stuff like that. And I mean, really, it wasn't the intent to do something like that, but it's one of the things that we've been kind of butting up against as well is that, you know, our struggle is to get these communities to reduce their water loss, to be within the, you know, less than 10% non-revenue water. And we're getting resistance to it. And partly because they're making money off of this. And it's just like, they don't want to spend the money on the infrastructure because the infrastructure is so much more expensive. and it's not politically popular either. And that's another hurdle we've got right now.
Yeah, that's very real. And that is right. That, yeah, closing that kind of financial loop is a real question. I think though, I mean, that's a real question, but I think though that in the bringing recycled water into the mix, we don't actually have to mess with their markup, right? Water's water, right? So I mean, that's one thing. I understand exactly what you're saying. And the whole team, would be really interested in, thinking these things through or, helping with the research around it. But in this case, you could still do a markup with recycled water. So in a certain way, you can expand supply in this way without addressing that, even though, Steve, I hear you 100%. That it's crazy that money for water doesn't go back into improving the system, that it goes into all kinds of other things. And that's another question, right?
I would put that in too, that in fact, just last week, I had a conversation with a plant operator from Cliffs Corporation, and they make steel products or product to make steel. And they were using, I was there to see wetlands, and then they mistakenly said about water use, and suddenly my attention was diverted to that topic instead of the wetlands anymore. But they say, well, from our perspective, it's something that's very, they want to use it as part of their outreach, right? They want to be known as an industry that's trying to have resiliency and be green in a way by trying to be good stewards that way. So I've talked to 2 or 3 other places, industries that have used it, and each of them so far have said, no, it's been a great PR for our industry to embrace this and move forward. Just a comment.
Considered any of that, I'm speaking loudly to it. Any consequence in downstream aquatic ecosystem impacts? Because depending on how much of the wastewater is diverted for industry, is that industry just going to return it or be consumptive? And then where is that water, that treated effluent or the wastewater, going to be coming in? Is it going to be coming into a different drainage network than originally would be? How does that affect in a different drainage system in the ecosystem habitat than the other one? And if it's significant enough, could it affect really minimum flow requirements for ecosystem health during really low times? So I think there's going to be a downstream impact. I don't know how far, but that has to be a part of the
Yeah, Krishna, this has come up, and Krishna's, I'm going to let Krishna answer because he's looked into.
We did some preliminary calculations on like what is the demand for reuse. We consider the worst case scenario to say, you have a maximum water reuse, and we use that one, and we looked at what would be the effect on water levels, and that was very minimal. I mean, the percentage of water that we're going to reuse is it's very less. It's like maybe 5% of the water that is being now disposed of. So even assuming the worst case scenario of not only Joliet, surrounding areas, if they reuse it, the water levels in the rivers, canals would be very minimal. Because, the amount of water that we are using is much less. How much is it? We are assuming that maximum reuse is about, for Joliet case, about 13 million gallons per day, compared to, 600 million gallons per day that's being disposed. So the fraction of, the water that is being disposed is very less.
And this would be just for Joliet, but I think, if this expands into the greater Chicago area, then, I think it might have a bigger impact. How much, I don't know, but
That's true.
question will come up.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? Because as long as it's communities where the drainage is into the Des Plaines or the Illinois, right? It's all the same. It's, but you're right, to go completely outside of that is worth looking at. So like if we, looked at a different county where the projections are for groundwater loss, and they're planning to look to Lake Michigan. Yeah, that's a great point.
We could do another study, for example, in this one, we just looked at Joliet. We could do another study where we simulate for a variety of different counties or variety of different locations.
That would be extreme.
You know, and we haven't, I mean, especially when, you know, we start to talk about a potential pilot project and this Department of the Interior grant. I mean, you know, doing this within Cook County is also still in the running. The reason that, and we did, you know, we have looked at some models and there's some past research. The reason we started looking at Joliet, you know, is the significance of the infrastructure. And the advice was, it's always easier to do something new at a brand new project when you're already digging things up, when the easement is already there. And some of the new technology is actually about stacking pipelines instead of, you know, doing it horizontal. So, you know, there's still, the Joliet case still has a lot to, you know, there's a lot of reasons to move there. However, you know, we understand, I mean, for us, any reuse within the state is a gain. So that's, you know, our number one, that's the number one priority. This one is very significant. And, you know, as Krishna always reminds us, you know, it's a 100-year contract. So, you know, agreeing to the range, the volumes allocated, I mean, that's a really significant promise. So it would be nice, you know, to build reuse into that. Although, you know, our project and reuse in Illinois does not need to rise or fall on Joliet, but there's a lot of reasons why we think this would be, you know, really advantageous across the board. Like, that's why I put the win-win. Nobody actually loses. Industry gets a stable supply. Maybe there's some alleviation of some of the cost burden on households. MWRD gets a stable client, the easement and the construction is going to happen anyway. We get to make some provisions about some of the volatility of climate change. Yeah, that's why it is a win-win.
I think unless, you know, until you get to like making a business case for the wholesale water and, you know, really for a municipality or, you know, to look into that. There's also, I think, but like regionally, I think there's probably some economic sense, right? In an area, certain, I don't know what that distance is, but within your existing treatment plants, there may be some economy of scale. Is there opportunity for use within a certain close by? You know, when you start talking about, do we take it out into the, you know, the northwest suburbs in some areas, well, now you're really having to, that might be a tougher economic, well, but there are opportunities there. I do want to, we have other business on the agenda, so I don't want to, part of today's intent was to just really help introduce, you know, something that's in our water plan that we're wanting to, as a task force, you know, advance and do so with our kind of consent and understanding of how we would advance that. So I'm going to call an EPA, but you know, I was just telling Todd, you know, they're not in the hot seat. We're not here to get into the nitty gritty of regulations and, oh my gosh, this and that. That is for another day when, as we advance it, if and when we advance it that way. But just kind of interested, Todd or any of your team, on just some initial insights that you would have from this introduction.
Okay. Well, one thing I would say, I know we've got Scott Twait on the phone and other folks from EPA, and so I encourage Jeff, Scott, anybody to sort of chime in. I know that IEPA has had some discussions on that sort of regulatory, statutory kind of side of this issue. I wasn't personally involved in those, so I can't and probably wouldn't be able to discuss them here, but it's an issue that is under some discussion within the IEPA because there's a lot of interested folks outside of this room who, and we can all see that this is could very well be an important part of water policy moving forward. And so I think those discussions are very preliminary, I think, at this point. But I'll throw it open to Jeff or Scott or anybody who else.
Yeah, I'll just say, I think listening to this, you have to think about what are the water quality regulations going to be for this. So there has to be a lot of thought going on that, and I've never not been involved in that. There's also about like you're talking about the water main, then you have to think about what's the distribution network and who's responsible for which portions. Do you have Joliet in your scenario be taking charge of a new set of pipes that they have to build and maintain? Do they have to go get a loan from the revolving loan fund to do that? At what rates? Building all of that into it, and really thinking about, if you were talking about a big project here, big main, but also I think Lauren, you just talked about what about smaller networks where there's shorter distances. Finding out where are the areas where you're really, you have the shallow groundwater areas where, like McHenry County is up there, where they're going to be running into some water supply issues likely over time. But you also have the south suburbs where you've got the I-80 corridor, which has got a lot of industrial development going on and new development. So how do you think about those kinds of issues? But there's a lot of layers to it.
Scott, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, this is Scott Twait. I know there was some legislation proposed earlier this year or the last fiscal year, I'm not sure, that was trying to encourage water reuse. I know that that we talked about it internally. I'm definitely not the person to talk about reuse. I know that it's going to need us to look at water quality standards, but there's also some treatment requirements, such as disinfecting the effluent. So I know the agency is definitely open to it, but we would have to look at what would be required.
This is Lauren again, and part of the reason we had, the folks in today was exactly that, right? That legislation, somebody very excited about that recommendation in the water plan, kind of jumped on it and went, right? And to me, it kind of got introduced too fast, too soon, right? And so, and therefore it hit some challenges. So I think, that's at least my goal was to come at this, now with more, we have research, we have other entities plugged in that can provide us good information. And so I think it's better coming from like a state water plan task force, that's going to say, well, let's kind of wrestle with this, figure out the way it should be introduced. How do we do that so that if and when we get to that point of introducing regulations or having to get into ad rules or something else, that we're better prepared, to testify or to support IEPA or whatever agency that would, need to press forward. And so that's part of what we're doing here as a task force, I think, is putting some more thought and wisdom behind how we advance so that so it's not a flash in the pan kind of, let's just go do this and have at it. I guess a question I would have kind of in wrapping up, and I know Rachel, you've talked about opportunities for grants and there's money out there. As recently as yesterday, I had a discussion as we talk about regional kind of opportunities with Eric, of the executive director of the Illinois International Port, right? And they also run a golf course as part of the port. And he's saying, I've got to redo my irrigation system anyway. And he said, we're right near a treatment plant. I would love to be engaged in a pilot kind of a program that used that gray water to do that kind of effort that the port could promote that we're there. And so there's opportunities like that. I know we've talked about Ford and some others that have a similar mindset. I guess a question that I would have, and maybe I don't need an answer, we don't need an answer today, but is there an opportunity if there's dollars out there and we have kind of willing players willing to promote kind of some pilot opportunities to help us learn and understand what would be on a smaller scale? Is that a possibility to do that without having, like full ad rule changes or legislation in place? It's kind of a cart and horse thing maybe. And so that's a general question I have. Is there a way forward to try and do some demonstration kind of activities, some pilot projects, particularly if we can get other dollars and partners involved that help advance the overall consideration? Or does that become a challenge or problematic in that sense? And again, I'm not sure if I don't need a yes or no right now, but
Well, and obviously a question like that brings in a lot of different folks with a lot of different perspectives from different programs. But we'll take that back, that specific question back, and start to see where, if we can get to a yes or a no and a why kind of an answer on that. So
I think it would help us wrestle with what that really means, on a small scale before we're trying to do Joliet. I mean, and Joliet certainly has the need is there and, the reasoning's there, but to be able to try and advance some smaller that could be used if we went forward, to see what are the pros, cons, what went well, what didn't go well, to do that. And I think that is a nice way to introduce that and try to take advantage of it when we have willing partners and potential funding sources lined up. So appreciate that IEPA to kind of take that back and give some really guidance, I think is what we're looking for at this point, on how best to proceed, because then that really, helps advance. I was kind of amused almost at how short and small that recommendation was compared to some of the wording of our others, but it's huge, right? In its impact and what it means to water and the way we deal with water in the state of Illinois, particularly Northeastern. And again, Northeastern for several reasons gives us, I think that's the right place to start. Should someday, well beyond our careers, it could expand across the state for where it's appropriate. But appreciate everybody's continued thought about that. Again, today at this, we wanted to introduce it to the task force so that we're thinking about that. And I think as a task force, we want to advance that together. And I think there's power behind doing that. So thank you. Any other thoughts from our guests? Any other questions? Otherwise, I think we'll move on to the next part of our agenda.
This is Brian Tots with IDPH. I just wanted to make sure that IDPH gets included in any of those conversations going forward, because we do already have admin rules specifically for like lawn sprinkler irrigation systems, where if non-potable sources are to be used for those, they have to come to IDPH for approval for those systems. Similarly, when gray water is going to be utilized for things that would typically be served by potable uses, such as like toilet flushing or some of the other things like that, hose bibs, we already have to provide approvals for it, and that's something that we have done, is provide basically case-by-case approvals for use of gray water for those specific uses. And so I just would want to make sure that IDPH gets included in that too, because I hear a lot of references to IEPA in that, but IDPH is already regulating those things as well.
Exactly. Thank you. And, IDPH is a member of the task force, right? So you are at the table and your voice matters. So appreciate that insight. And obviously you'll be part of the team as we continue to go forward.
Different WRDGP, and we found out that only other guidance that is there in the published literature is US EPA guidelines for water reuse. So we looked at the water quality of the effluent that is coming out from the plants versus the quality requirements for according to US EPA guidelines. So it meets or exceeds meets the requirements. So And also we realized that if any additional treatment is needed based on the industrial use, that could be done on site. So from water quality and of course, the water treatment technologies, they're all there. It's very established field and they can be tailored depending upon what quality standards are needed. So from engineering point of view, we really realized that it's not from water quality and treatment point of view, it's not a huge challenge. But all these other issues that we're talking about, that's infrastructure, as you pointed out, the delivery infrastructure, right? So that, that's an important issue. For Joliet, we were thinking about, having a dual pipeline all the way to the Joliet. But anyway, Joliet is going to have a distribution network to the industries anyway. So basically, have this hooked up to that delivery system, delivery infrastructure. So we found a delivery infrastructure is the main issue, but water quality and in terms of the technologies available to meet the treatment goals, especially non-potable water users, the water, we feel so bad, somebody who works in sustainability and sustainable development goals, providing water as a basic necessity and conserving the natural resources. It's like, just dumping all that water, so treated so well into just discarding that and going into ultimately as a useless, water into the ocean. That's really bad. I think that's what we're feeling about it. So the water quality issue, if you look at the data, quality is so good, and we should be able to use it directly without any additional treatment for many non-potable uses. And industry reuse is the least concerning in terms of water quality issues. So I hope IEPA can take differentiate the different uses. Maybe the ones which are easy to handle, maybe we can address those things. The portable one could be like a little bit challenging. Always nobody wants to. They have a EP factor, right? So nobody wants to drink reuse water. So that can be categorized separately. But things that can be done easily from water quality point of view, I think we can just, IEPA could take that phased approach. That would be the best thing to do.
We brought the report in for everybody. We can pass them around. We can follow up. Yeah.
I'm wondering if it makes sense here as we wrap up this topic to, as we've talked about pilot projects, that, in order for IDPH and IEPA to be able to better facilitate your discussions, right, behind some concept level, if we shouldn't try to put a little more meat to the bones, maybe on funding opportunities, number one, but I'll just pick on again, like the Illinois port, right? Getting with them, what do you envision? What does that really mean for a project? How much pipeline, what distribution system? So I think we could get at least to the next level, maybe a next step in a planning phase of information to better resource those entities on the task force so they can have a more productive discussion and provide insights. Does that make sense? I think, we're happy to step in and help develop some of that together in order to resource all the members of the task force so that they can have better discussions, from their particular aspect. So, yeah. All right, last call for any other questions. Okay.
One of the only other things that I would add to that too is I would just ask if you guys have given any consideration to including labor partners associated in those conversations about water reuse. And the only reason that I mentioned that is just because IDPH had tried to incorporate some water reuse standards into the Illinois Plumbing Code. And there had been some disputes over that work from different labor organizations. And so that ended up being one of the challenges with us trying to get those regulations adopted. And so I would just encourage, I guess, those labor partners to be included in any conversations going forward, just to ensure that doesn't create a roadblock in the future. after you guys have already put a bunch of legwork into it.
Noted, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that insight. Walt will be preparing a dissertation of questions for you. And all right, again, thank you, Rachel and team, UIS, for making the effort to come down and really help us put a spotlight on this recommendation and opportunities that are there. And so I think, like I said, we'll take it maybe another step and see how we develop that together and focus. But and I use this to really say, this is part of the intent, I think, of the task force. And we'll get into this in a minute or two about, why I want to more codify and solidify this group, because it's topics and discussions like this that I think the State Water Plan Task Force provides the right venue for all state agencies that have, some hand in anything dealing with water to come together and look at that together and be unified in how, how we move forward. So this is one topic. We have 147 recommendations, right? So there could be many, many more that we want to highlight a specific, topic or recommendation and bring it before the State Water Plan Task Force to kind of vent and, to bring that up and have an open discussion. I just think that's good government in the state of Illinois to go about it that way in order to advance things. So again, thank you to our guests, and I think we'll move on. Thank you, Wes.
Thank you, Lauren. And at the request we had that we jumped our agenda slightly, so just bear with me. Straight into legislative updates at the request of some of our participants here at the meeting. So I will pull this up, but actually I'll probably have to take that back to Lauren as I scroll down to the legislative updates. Oh, Lauren, I think you had prepared maybe a few comments you were going to make about legislative updates. Is that correct?
Sure. Yeah. And so, thank you, Wes. Really, because and I think two of these came straight out of the integrated water management chapter that my committee and team kind of headed up there. And so, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, really wanted to, and a recommendation in the State Water Plan was to codify the State Water Plan Task Force. We were set up by governor's executive order, and really this plan, that we have before us, the 2022, 21, anyhow, 20. That plan was really a grassroots effort. Thanks to everybody kind of around the table today that we just decided it was time to update that and went forward. But really going beyond us, how do we make sure that that's updated regularly and that resources are provided? So we've drafted legislation to that effect that would codify that kind of setting it up in Rivers, Lakes, and Streams Act. And so that legislation has been drafted, and kind of the support summary information for that really adds a section to Rivers, Lakes, and Streams Act that sets up just for the State Water Plan Task Force. And so while earlier in that legislation it does call for there to be this kind of an activity, this really calls it out and identifies that. I certainly can share that with folks on, in the meeting and online. It's pretty short and sweet, but it becomes the State Water Plan Task Force Act portion of that, but it just calls out what the State Water Plan Task Force does and how that goes forward. And so at this point, it was developed, we lifted it up through the IDNR legislative process. DNR, like many of the agencies on the task force, has a limit on the number that they get to advance at any one time. As I'll get to in a minute, I had a couple of other legislative actions that are moving forward. And so this likely, while it will be supported by IDNR, may not be introduced by IDNR. But I think the game plan at this point, and we've talked with PRI, University of Illinois about, also potentially doing that as well. And similarly, they have to be, prioritize and know which legislation they're putting forward. But I say all that to say that there are still General Assembly members that are excited about the state water plan, and they've reached out to me as chair and said as much. What do you need me to do? Right? I love this idea that we've updated the plan. How can we advance that? And so we have willing, legislators that would be willing to sponsor something, especially something that's just kind of good government, right? That doesn't have a lot of necessarily, contentious issues associated with that. It's just trying to be a better government. So I believe we'll be talking with a couple of those senators or representatives individually and seeing if they would then sponsor and put forward this bill. And then the entities of the State Water Plan Task Force can simply step up in support of that legislation sponsored by Senator or Representative X. So that's kind of where that one is. The Integrated Water Information Center, I know that's been a big one. And so again, DNR, primarily DNR and University of Illinois, State Water Survey, other folks within PRI, Geological Survey, Sustainability Institute. We've been working together to again draft language that establishes the Integrated Water Information Center. And at this point, I believe the University of Illinois is willing to continue to proceed down their legislative process. It's advanced so far. It's made the cut. It's important to PRI to do that. They're on board with it. So while the DNR, by again, the State Water, I think it's under the Rivers, Lakes, and Streams Act, we're the ones accountable for having a repository. What got us to this point is we haven't, right? Because we don't have the capacity that a university kind of a setup is better to structure. And so we're basically going to take out a couple of words where in the legislation it says basically DNR will make its office a repository. We've taken out the word its office. So it would just be that IDNR is to make a repository for this all water data. And we had a great discussion on this earlier this week, right? That's when it was. Or I guess last week. No, we're into Monday right now. So last week, but we had a great discussion at the State Water Survey Advisory Board meeting about this, and all is a big word, right? But I think that's what the legislation calls us to do. But advancing this maybe helps us better define all, and what all could be and in what shape or form or manner forward. So again, that legislation has been drafted. We can share that, and at the moment it's remaining in the University of Illinois legislative process to move forward. DNR has stood up to support. We wanted to introduce it, but again, we're limited on how many bills our agency can introduce. So that's where we are on that. On the National Flood Insurance Program implementation, this is one that DNR is advancing. In fact, we're probably advancing it in the veto session as fast as we can. This is basically FEMA, running the National Flood Insurance Program, and as cooperative technical partners, DNR and State Water Survey and others, we work closely with them, but DNR is charged with more of the implementation at a community level of that program. But FEMA came back and said, okay, while you're out there trying to make sure that all the communities have the right ordinance and are doing the right thing from a National Flood Insurance Program perspective, the state of Illinois is horrible, right? You've got agencies and entities that are out there building in the floodplain and doing all kinds of stuff, spending capital dollars and not compliant with National Flood Insurance Program policies and good floodplain management. And so they're like, you need to get at that. Well, we said, well, we have an executive order from, 20 years ago that sets that up. But FEMA looked at that and said, that's not good enough, right? That is not good enough. And so as we look to improve that, we did make the decision that it's most powerful to be in legislation, not another executive order, because executive orders come with administrations and maybe go with administrations. So we've developed that, but it will really call on all other state entities, IDOT, Brian, but, and others that are doing, work in the floodplain and capital improvements to make sure that they're compliant with floodplain management practices like we ask of our own communities in Illinois to do. So that's what this legislation is about. That is one that DNR will sponsor, will take forward as we move on that. Last one on the list here, the local assistance program. And I can't remember right off the top of my head which section that was. Tara, I don't know if you know. It's in mine? Okay. So that's maybe why I remember it. But we're looking to recreate a better local assistance program that existed many, many years ago. Todd, you might even remember this from some of your involvement in that, not to call you out as elderly or anything, but it was more of a going out to communities and having a better relationship with communities about what are your water needs? And that's not, and so we go there under our different programs, what is your water quality if you're EPA, or we might be there for what is your flood damage needs, or what is your NFIP involvement? How's your ordinance? And this was more of having a relationship with the community where they would be able to say, well, anything water related, we do. We have a water supply problem. We also have these 4 flooded homes over on 7th Street. And to be able to have a local assistance, kind of an outreach and a program that would be able to help then bridge that or help that community know which program to plug into and do that for, again, the good of the state government and the programs that it impact. And the Illinois Environmental Council grabbed onto that recommendation from the state water plan. That's how they came about that. And they've informed me that they're trying to prepare advance legislation, probably in the spring, that lifts that particular recommendation up and tries to advance it. So I don't have any strong details that I can provide you on that particular legislation, but at least for today's meeting, wanted to update you that is on the Illinois Environmental Council's agenda, wanting to help us advance recommendations, and they did kind of glomp onto that one. And so perhaps our next meeting, maybe we'll have a little more draft language that we could share and discuss. But I just wanted to have an awareness that was moving forward as well. Any other legislative updates from any of the other activities that members might be aware of? All right, thank you, Wes.
Thank you, Lauren. I was just going to give a couple of quick updates. I know our meeting is scheduled for 3 o'clock to come to a conclusion. We're quickly running up against that timeline, so I'll just go through a couple of slides real quick just to give a few general updates. We have been continuing to publish and publicize the state water plan. You can see back in July and August, we continue to make presentations to get the word out about the publication of the state water plan, just to get the word out. And there is still some continued discussion about establishing a meeting up in Chicago with some of the legislators up in that area as well. So that activity is ongoing. Just like to continue to give an update report on how things are moving in the grand scheme of things. We talked about one single recommendation today, but as Lauren said, there is 147 recommendations to date. We now are up to 37 of those recommendations actually being started. The average progression of all those recommendations starts about 0.25% through, with a total of about 6% if we look at all 147. So if you include all the recommendations that have and have not started, we're about 6% of the way through implementation. Some of those are completed. Maybe that'd be a good one to show, as well as how many are actually completed. So I might add that now that we've been at it. It's hard to believe that we're coming up almost on a year that this plan has been published. December was December 22 is when it was published. So we're coming up on that 1-year time frame. So I'll just kind of note this is 7 of the sections gave an update this past quarter. So just continue to reach out to me. I try and ask for a quarterly update. Should be a very quick, simple update. I don't need any drawn out heavy details, but just so that we can keep a transparent viewpoint for the public and let them know how we're progressing. Again, the purpose wasn't to create a plan, just to create a plan because every other state's doing it, but to implement that plan and carry it forward. So it's good to provide those updates for the public so that we can post that to our website and share that we are making progress in our report. Typically, I guess I'll kind of see what everyone's input is because we are coming up on our 3 o'clock time frame. If we want to go through and discuss any milestones for each of the 13 critical topics. From the reports I gathered in, I didn't see any major milestones. So maybe at this point, I'll just see if any topic lead or any committee member of those topics have any significant milestones they want to share or discuss with the group.
Through the list or just call on it and see update or not.
Okay, yeah, so, all right, so I guess we'll start with IEPA on water quality. Is there any significant updates?
Doing some work on it. We are doing work on it, and we will continue to do work on it. How should we reflect that here?
So one thing that we tried to do when we put in the recommendations that we had kept internally was, what are the milestones? How do we judge success? So that should have been developed whenever we developed the plan. So going back and referring to those, what are our milestones? What are those measurable goals and seeing how those are being evaluated is probably a good starting point. And maybe those need to be revised in some way and tweaked. This plan is not just set in stone for the next 10 years. We know that things can be tweaked, adjusted, and
Very fluid, yeah.
yeah, it's very fluent. So, it may have been, well, we've started this program, but we've, implemented in this one region, or we've worked with X number of communities and we want to work throughout the whole. So how do we make that measurable? Well, I think that's up to that lead agency to really find out, say, hey, this is what our goal is by the 10-year mark. Maybe we've reached so many communities or implemented this X amount of times or spent X amount of dollars implementing this program. So that's what I would just recommend. I'm not sure if anybody has anything else to add, but I think, again, we tried to kind of spell that out early as we developed these recommendations on how do we make them measurable.
And I would say, Todd, even an acknowledgement that, yeah, recommendation X was assigned to IEPA, and yes, IEPA is working to address that, right? As opposed to we haven't gotten to it yet, right? Or, something to that nature. That,
Well, and I asked because, the first one, support nutrient loss reduction strategy, right?
you got that taken care of, don't you?
Right, we absolutely do. And obviously we're spending a lot of time and resources doing any number of different things. I mean, we've got our the 2023 biennial report. We expect to have that out in December. That's in process right now. But there's going to be a biennial in 25 and 27.
I would, so on that matter, I think I would just say, yeah, work proceeds on, completing the 23 biennial report or something, for nutrient. Boom, that statement alone, that's
all right.
Showing work advancing, going that way.
Right. Okay.
Again, I think we have that 10-year outline. So maybe if you're doing 5 updates in that time, you've done 1 update, you're now 20% complete.
Okay.
Providing those updates, and we're showing that we're making progress, but we still have work to do. It's not like we're completely done supporting but we have made progress.
We are not completely done supporting, but we can make progress.
There you go.
Supporting the nutrient loss. No, and I think that helps, will certainly help us moving forward. We've been doing a lot of work, gathering probably too much detail internally, preparing to come here, but also we want to understand the right sort of context for the reports that we're going to make, and make sure we're paying attention to the right things. So
I know things get shifted around, so if anybody wants to see what those internal benchmarks were that they set for themselves, we can provide that. I just don't send them out or necessarily have those published with the overall. Yeah. Send me a reminder just to make sure, but I'll try and get that to you whenever I get back to the office.
I think a general statement that I would make is, you know, pick on the IEC, right? There are people watching, right, that are plugged in and are plugged into this report. And so they're just, so it would be, well, what would you want them to know so that they're not calling and bugging you or saying, hey, why aren't you X, Y, or Z, you know? And so it would just be that kind of enough of a teaser, if you will, particularly at a reporting kind of a level from this entity, that would be for those other partners and entities that are looking in to see how things are advancing.
So right now, we don't publish that progress table. We've talked about having each section have their own sub-page for the task force. Those are something that we can kind of discuss as we continue here, but somehow sharing that information instead of just this general statistic that we've completed 6% of the recommendation doesn't really tell anybody a whole lot. But if there's somebody wanting to know where are we at with water reuse, then we can clearly spell out what progress we've made to initiate that. So,
okay, fair enough.
And when you look at your items, your improvement items, look at the report too, because those are just 5 or 6 words trying to
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
A little more detail in the table that sort of explain what you were planning to do, and back to his table as well. It shouldn't be, the idea was to not make it hard. It's supposed to be thought about it, but when you do those updates, on the far right of Wes's table is a comment to say, well, I would be doing this item, but this other item isn't done. So I think as long as you can explain why, I think that'll help too. Thanks.
it is a 10-year plan. We're only down 1 year, so know that we're not supposed to be done with it yet either. Todd, is there anything else you want to report on? Or?
Well, I mean, there are certainly plenty of updates on any one of the any number of the goals that IEPA folks were assigned to that we could report on. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I want to build up what Lauren was talking about, the technical assistance things. You know, there's the issue of disadvantaged communities needing more assistance. And I know our revolving loan fund people have had some contracts signed with for rural water to provide local technical assistance. It's long-term funding, but it's related to the water quality. And you know, we're doing more within a number of the grant programs to, I guess, encourage more or giving, when we're getting into the scoring, to give greater weight to some of the communities that are environmental justice communities so that they can do that. And the green infrastructure grant opportunity, which is due on Wednesday at noon, if anyone wants to start on that. For instance, we've got a lower match requirement for them, 15% as opposed to 25%. Match is a tremendously difficult thing for a number of communities. And I know the loan group deals with loan forgiveness at times and things like that. So there are a number of issues that we're dealing with in both of those, the long-term funding and the water quality on that. So I'll leave it at that.
I would just add that really, you know, the intent was to kind of weave in social and environmental justice and all that we do. And what you've just stated there, you know, Jeff is really saying we are, right? And it's absolutely that example. And so to be able to show that and shine that, to really say, yes, see, it did. We were true to what we meant when we're trying to have that perspective on what we're advancing. So thank you for that.
Right. Yeah. And maybe one thing I would mention would be emerging contaminants, because that theme runs through any number of these different things. And there's several different things IEPA is doing, continues to do. On the PFAS front, we've begun to, we collect fish tissue samples every year, and we, working with DNR and IDPH, look at the safety of sport fish in Illinois. We've begun to analyze all of those samples for PFAS. IEPA's lab was able to acquire a piece of equipment and get certified on certain methodologies, and we hope to, by about first quarter of next year, be able to also analyze other media, other water samples for, that's going to be the next focus of it, water samples for PFAS. We've also begun to phase in PFAS monitoring on wastewater NPDES permits. Major industrials, some minor industrial dischargers, depending on their SIC codes, are going to, we've put that condition in there. And it's just a monitoring because we don't have standards at this point. But those are all going to be good data for us to understand the circumstances in Illinois and what we're facing. We're looking at adding the same things perhaps to land application of sludges in several other areas, and sort of all of that is very active, very ongoing right now within the Bureau of Water's permitting program. So, and just maybe time, I will stop there.
PFAS is a huge thing. I know across all of states, right?
Yes.
It's everywhere.
Yes.
That's my understanding.
We got new equipment. It's in use, so.
Yeah.
From there, we'll move on to climate change. Trent, do you have anything on behalf? I assume you're here representing. I kind of figured as much. If you have anything, if not, that's fine too.
Yeah, I don't think Dave's on, so this is Trent Ford from the State Water Survey. Just a few things. I know for the projected Bulletin 75 estimates, I know that work is ongoing. Sheila Marcus is leading at the State Water Survey, which is great. The recommendation of flash drought and hazard mitigation plans. I don't know how this goes towards the percent complete. So we haven't done any of that work in county hazard mitigation plans as it was written in the plan, but the state's hazard mitigation plan will hopefully include language about flash drought and some talk about projections of flash drought hazards. So that's a good step forward in that direction. And then otherwise, just looking to secure a lot of the recommendations in the climate change chapter are requiring federal funding as their studies, scientific studies. So that's all ongoing. As always. Yeah.
Lauren, we're kind of transitioning, but do you have anything on integrated water management beyond what was?
Beyond what I shared here.
Okay. Next, we have EPA. I'm not sure on long-term funding.
I talked a little bit about that already, but I think I'd probably add, looking at ways in which it's related to the technical assistance. There are issues associated with thinking through sort of requiring asset management for systems, so you know what needs to be fixed, what's going to be a top priority. So that's something that really needs to be looked at, but that's connected, I think, to the technical assistance issue on that one, and I think we'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Cool.
I might just add in, since we're on that topic, that as under our water allocation program, water loss is a big part of that through the infrastructure, and so we've actually hired some new staffing now, but we are going to have a focus on going to at least those 225-ish communities that get Lake Michigan water one by one, and where are you at in your water system improvement plan? Of course, by law, they have to try to be less than 10%, but we're there to, number one, see where they're at, but work with them to improve it, prioritize, and then for the disadvantaged areas, we hope to be able to kind of come in. We have some capital dollars, our thought being to try to have like maybe a consultant on board that we could give tasks to help advance specific tasks, really, and we want to do that in partnership with IEPA. Yeah.
Sounds like that's kind of coordinated.
Yes.
We have a lot of very sort of day-to-day communication and coordination with systems all across the state. And the smaller, the more oftentimes we have because they sometimes lack that expertise. And so even if it's facilitating the communication, we could probably play that role if nothing else.
Yep.
So
I think I definitely want to move together on that, but I just want letting you know that we have increased capacity on our side, to be able to start to do that together where we weren't able to before. All we were doing was collecting water loss data, but not really trying to move the needle on that. So looking forward to working more with you guys on that as well.
Thank you very much. Next, I think we have Way up on water sustainability. Way, anything to report on water sustainability?
Just a few things for the determine sustainability of water yield for all water supply sources. What is here? Well, correct me if I'm wrong. We have completed sustainable yield of our groundwater and surface water. Have them all determined by the State Water Survey under under the OWR contract. And the State Water Survey will develop a website to make the data publicly available to stakeholders. So they establish and support regional water supply committees. We are finalizing a 2-year grant agreement with Heartland Conservancy in downstate area in support of water supply planning activities in Kaskaskia River region. Also for updating state drought preparedness and response plan, OWR has participated drought planning discussion organized by Midwest Dews, where the other state has updated their state drought plan status. We expect more discussion will be scheduled in the near future. Yeah.
It's interesting. Is there a discussion of updating that report for Illinois in the near future? Is that okay? Okay. Not moving yet. Okay, very good. Thank you. Next, we have Lake Michigan. I think Anya had to jump off the call a little while ago at 3 o'clock. I don't think, is there anybody who would want to give any update? You know, Lauren, I don't know if you have anything, or Steve, or anybody else. If I don't hear anything, I'll just assume none.
I can jump in. I'm Tara Jagadish, also with the IDNR Coastal Program, so taking over for Anya.
Yes.
Yeah, so just an update on that. I'll actually be the lead for this section now, since Anya's moving away from the Coastal Program, so you can add that to the lead individual.
Tara,
Yeah,
I
and
knew we were
then
in transition, but I didn't know if it was official yet, so I didn't want to put you up on the slide yet. So I wanted to make sure that that was official. But I'll go ahead and make that update. Thank you.
yeah, no worries. You can definitely do that. Anya is still working with the Coastal Program, but sort of in a transition. So I'm going to be taking over for her officially in this role. So yeah, to just give some updates. Well, first, one thing we're working on is sort of building up this section for the Lake Michigan part. I think this is something that we haven't had a chance to really provide much capacity to in the past. So as I'm taking a lead, we're kind of working on joining efforts between our staff and then the Coastal Program staff and LWR staff, since the Lake Michigan section covers sort of both water allocation stuff and also coastal resiliency. So we're also going to be thinking about recruiting other water leaders from our region to kind of help staff this section. And then beyond that, some of the work that the Coastal Program aspect of things is doing. Right now, our main focus is applying for federal funds that are coming in for coastal resiliency work. I think we're seeing a lot of things coming from the IIJA, IRA. So most of our focus right now is connecting partners with these funding opportunities and applying ourselves. We actually just had 2 LOIs that were invited for full proposals for a NOAA grant that's available exclusively to coastal programs, so that's super exciting. And then beyond that, we're working on a couple coastal resiliency plans. So there's one for the North Shore and then one for the South Shore that we are partnering on with various municipalities, nonprofits to develop those for. And then in addition to that, we are also working on building our staff capacity. I think a lot of these tasks have been held a bit by just us not having enough staff to focus on them. So we've hired a couple new people and are working on finding a director as well. So yeah, those are the updates from the coastal part. Russell, if you're still on, maybe you could give a couple updates about the water allocation.
Sure thing. So I guess earlier we covered the water reuse possibility and pending legislation. That could be a huge bonus to the new permittees and allocatees that we're going to be getting in the future. Luz Payen was hired for the Lake Michigan allocation program. Soon enough, we're going to try to develop or synthesize some work with the Chicago Department of Water Management. They have the Chicago Water Partners Advisory Council, which they would want us to be a part of. And the city of Chicago controls about 120 allocations. They provide 120 allocations of water around the area. And having them as a regional partner would definitely help, not only for outreach and water loss, but possible funding opportunities in the future. They really move the needle, and their communities that require water, or provide water from the city of Chicago, really listen to them. So this will be great moving forward in the future, and hopefully a burgeoning relationship between us, the state, and the city as well. I guess one other thing is the portal. I guess that Lauren was referencing earlier. We haven't really had any movement on that yet. So just in terms of all water data and around the state. Yeah, not much besides that though.
Okay.
Possibilities in the future. So.
All right. Well, thank you, Russ and Tara. We'll appreciate the update up on the Lake Michigan group up there. So next, we'll go ahead and turn it over, see if Tara has any updates.
I will say, this last quarter, we didn't make as much progress as I'd hoped. So I'm going to go ahead and just take this time to remind people to reconvene your committees and bring those conversations going, reassign some of those implementation. We are having a meeting on some of our projects with State Water Survey. Hopefully in the next few weeks, we'll have a better update next time. But I also wanted to mention what Jeff had mentioned, maybe at this meeting or even just via email. If your agencies has any funding opportunities, maybe reach out to the task force. Someone from my committee reached out about the green infrastructure. And when I looked, there's several of our recommendations that are impacted directly that we could show progress. Even if it's not in your water quality, there's other topics that these different funding opportunities could help. And so just let the group know if your agency has something, a new funding or legislation. I think both of those should be discussed at future meetings. There's also another infrastructure from EPA that it's $750,000 of funding available for watershed-based plans and all kinds of things that I did searches. I've got about 30 different recommendations that could match these types of grants. So it's just something we need to share amongst each other. And I'm going to probably send something to Wes that to have, I've picked some of the recommendations that might fall within these. I know the grant process is done, but that's this year. I'm thinking next year. And also with all this funding, the infrastructure build, both from the governor and from federal. You guys are hearing about it. We need to share with all of our other agencies because what's tricky about the task force is we have 13 topics and each topic has 4 or 5 different agencies that are impacted. So when you do your recommendation and your implementation, you're helping someone else's too. So just remember that, and that's what these meetings are for. But you know, just reminder to work together and share whatever you can.
Okay, thank you, Tara. Moving on, I didn't see Brian. Brian, are you on? I don't think I saw you on the participation list. Does anybody from ORC or have an update on aquatic habitat? Not hearing any. We'll move on. Steve, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Any updates on water use?
Other than what we just talked about extensively today, nothing right now. I'll be reconvening my group here very soon. So start talking about where we're going to go next.
All right. Thanks, Steve. With that, we'll move that on to navigation. Brian McCoy, any updates on navigation?
Got a couple of quick things. Trying to fast. IDOT is supporting and we're funding a study that's going to provide resources for the port districts as part of our technology and streamlining operations. And that's going to take probably longer amount of time than anticipated, probably maybe 3 years before we can get that out. But the process started where there's going to be a directory as well as a rates and charges database, or it's a resource spreadsheet of information, and as well as a report that provides an updated needs assessment. The IDOT also recently funded a resiliency improvement plan. It's a statewide resiliency improvement plan. Some other areas have also taken on some funding to improve the sustainability and resiliency. So International Port District, Chicago has also taken on funding for updating their plan. In June, at the end of June, the governor signed Illinois Waterways Ports Commission Act, which assigned a new ports commission, which encompasses a 10-county area of Heart of Illinois Port District, which is around Peoria along the Illinois River. And they're very active, and it sounds like a lot of good things going to come out of that with oversight and providing assistance for infrastructure improvement. So that's going to affect a number of our other areas where we need to make improvements on and try to develop our port districts. And as well as keep everybody posted by the next quarter. Our website is going to do an update. A lot of information and resources are going to be provided on our website, as well as GIS maps, beneficial use of dredge material, which is part of our initiative, and recommendations, updated information on those sites, working with the Corps of Engineers in order to provide additional and updated sites. That's all I got.
Thank you, Brian. Next up, we have erosion and sedimentation.
Good afternoon, Wes. Michael Woods. With regards to efforts right now, we're kind of going to be hosting a series of meetings here shortly. A lot of efforts have been going into NLRS of late, and with what's predicted to come out of that, sediment and erosion is going to be a hot topic. And so we're going to be convening those groups and having some more conversations here in the very near future. Looking at January 25th, I believe it is, 25th or 26th, to hosting some sort of a critical conversations about these topics.
All right, well, we're looking forward to it, Michael. Thank you. Next, we'll move on to data management. Any updates?
Not a huge updates. Right now, the Water Survey's been looking at the 2 previous assessments of the stream gauging network. And we're questioning whether the approach should be duplicated again for a 3rd time. So we might be sending out a straw poll to the STAT task force and maybe some of the partner organizations to determine if there's any changes in people's use of the stream gauging data, things of that nature, so we can refine that, so we can develop a proposal for getting funding to have that done. Otherwise, we can't move on to the second recommendation being,
organizing essentially a stream gauging cooperative among the states, among the agencies in the states, to actually have a more coordinated effort on the use and which stations stay and is hopefully additions and things like that. Can't move on that until you kind of know where we already stand. So we're going right now.
Great, thank you. And we also have recreation. That's you, you're up.
That's not on.
If you don't have anything, no pressure.
No, I actually, I really don't have anything, being somewhat new, I guess, other than, you know, the aquatic conservation stamp on here is always it is a fisheries priority, our top priority in resource conservation. We keep continuing to try to put that forward as a legislative initiative. No traction yet, but the interest is out there. Boating access, we usually meet in October, November about our boating access improvements. Have not yet met on that this year. I see we have, you know, developed mobile app with angling information. We'd hope to, for this fiscal year, begin our new process with our database to get some of that information going. That had to be delayed for you know, funding purposes essentially. So that will probably get kicked off, you know, in the early planning for November for FY25. So that's pretty much it for me.
Thank you. Yeah, and just if there's any publications or new things coming out, like apps or something you want to share with the group, just feel free to forward it to me and I can move it forward to the group. So with that, I guess, is there any other general or specific comments regarding the recommendations within the reports? Any questions or comments? Okay, hearing none, we'll go ahead and continue on. Essentially, that's the I think most of what we wanted to cover for today. Just a heads up that the next meeting will be in the new year, January 8th. And again, we'll move back to our virtual meeting format. Again, we're only meeting in person once a year, which is what we kind of talked about. So we'll likely keep it in this fall. I know summer is always hit or miss, so it seems like the fall may be a good time. If you have any other thoughts or other comments, feel free to share your inputs. So right now I'll just kind of open it for any final thoughts, discussion points, or even possible topics for our next meeting.
Jeff had some questions, wanted to talk from the groups as to what kind of technology.
Basically, to use more technology. I think this is something it's a very wide issue. Maybe we'll have a conversation, narrow this down a little bit more, maybe after the meeting, more informally. But it's something, you know, using technology to better make decisions. 25 years ago, I heard this great phrase. So there's a difference between data, information, knowledge, and stuff. But you got to figure out how to get from data to making those decisions through the wisdoms. That's a great phrase. You guys can use it.
You got that right, Megan.
Thinking about how can we use technology to help us do our work. So there's a lot of things for us.
So potential topic for next meeting would be just come with maybe an idea or two that you use of the most latest technology that you're implementing in your agency that we maybe all share, and maybe it's kind of a brainstorming session. Somebody might get some good information or good ideas. So maybe we could potentially just talk about that for a little bit of the meeting as well. Anybody else have any questions, comments, recommendations?
I do kind of like this format where we have, you know, one or two kind of focal things related to one of the recommendations, followed by the general update. I like that setup.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then pick one of the groups, two of them.
And you could almost just have one topic lead pick a critical issue that's emerging for them right now. You know, who's hitting a milestone and want to talk about it or share with that group or something. So I think that's good. I apologize. I know we scheduled for 3 o'clock, then we added in this presentation and that ended up going a little longer. So we're running a little longer in meetings, but I think if we do kind of have this format, we will probably push it back to having that 2-hour length meeting instead of an hour and a half when we were just giving updates. So if you have any concerns of that, speak now or I'll just assume it's good.
I think, again, building off of what we're trying to put into this legislation, that the group has value. I mean, it's just good government and having all voices from the various perspectives, voicing in on a topic or a matter, an issue. That's the value and part of the reason for having the task force, I think, in the first place. So,
And I apologize. I'll be putting in a request to my boss asking for audio equipment. I think we talked about that. I think back in 2019, and then we didn't need it for a while. So I think we had those same technical issues whenever the task force was meeting back in the late teens. And it just kind of fell by the wayside because the demand went away. But now that that's coming back again, maybe we'll have an opportunity to look into a conference speaker microphone system that we can set up.
You're waiting for the OWL system to define and get better. That one, and it worked very well. Yes. Okay. Yep. Well,
Well, sounds like Lauren knows exactly what we need. So Lauren, whenever I come asking. Yeah. 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 I have seen systems where you can remotely place microphones around the room and maybe something that we'll look at what some options are and maybe. That would be great.
Mississippi that's got
Yeah.
and the projector.
I think that's the biggest thing. Yeah, the Mississippi room works pretty well from the times I've been there, but yeah, it's sufficient for this. Anyone? Oh. Anyone online have any comments or thoughts? Complaints about the meeting? No. Yeah. Any thoughts, additional topics? I guess we can talk. We mentioned about maybe having a presentation. Again, we don't want this to be where we're just having an agency give an update on their agency or anything, but I think we want to kind of tie it to the recommendations we had in the state water plan and how to pursue that and making sure the members are kind of aware of a key initiative that's, you know, making significant progress at that time. So if you have any recommendations or thoughts to that, reach out to myself and Lauren and Tara, and we can kind of coordinate that and look at maybe incorporating that in upcoming meetings. So otherwise, I'll just go to Lauren and say, hey, what are we talking about? No. Final opportunity to state comments, thoughts. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it to Lauren for our official close out of the meeting.
Well, thank you, everybody, for making the time and effort and for the contributions we've had today. I think it was valuable and time well spent. And with that, I'm going to call us adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren.
Feel like everyone thinks
Okay, thanks.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I was gonna type